One thing I'll bring to you on the Wednesday feature will be some technical angles of the week each week. And these are games where if you're just a technical handicapper looking at the angles, how teams do in certain situations, here are some strong angles each week to use. Let's start with this one. Now, last week in the Phil Steele Plus tour, we used UNLV plus the points over Northwestern. I pointed out that Coach Sanchez of UNLV was in his strongest role as an away dog, and that Pat Fitzgerald of Northwestern was in his weakest role, that of a favorite. If you go back and look at Northwestern games over the last 2 years now, during the regular season last year, the underdog was 11-0-1 in Northwestern games. So far this year, Northwestern's played 2 games, and while the dog is 1-1, I want to show you a play here. Northwestern was almost a touchdown underdog against Stanford. They had the ball, they were down 10-7, 20 seconds to go in the game, and look at this. Sack, fumble, touchdown. That is the only time an underdog in a Northwestern game the last 2 years of the regular season has lost against the spread, and it took a play like that to give Stanford the misleading 10-point cover. So again, Northwestern was down by 3 with 20 seconds to go in the game as a touchdown underdog in that one. Now, we know Northwestern play the dog, and Pat Fitzgerald does extremely well at home. But how about Michigan State now over the last 5 years has been an away favorite a total of 13 times. Their record, how about 3-10 against the spread? And this is the first road trip this year for Michigan State. Frankly, I'm a little surprised the number is over a touchdown with Northwestern right now, a 9.5-point underdog. Here is a technical game for this week. The Auburn Tigers travel to face Texas A&M in a big top 10 showdown on the road in Kyle Field. Now, last year when the two teams played, Texas A&M had a 27-13 first down edge on the road and appeared to have the game completely in control, but ended up losing. So they're playing with legitimate revenge. Well, this is the technical section, and adding to that factor, the fact that Auburn on the road as an away dog is just 2-8 against the spread since 2014. That's the last 6 years. Auburn is 2-8 against the spread as an away dog. And Texas A&M's last 4 years under Kevin Sumlin compiled a spread record of just 8-17-2 against the spread. Well, it's a new sheriff in town in Jimbo Fisher, and they've been a completely different team at home. In fact, the Aggies are 8-1 against the spread at home under Jimbo Fisher. There is a technical advantage, a poor road dog versus a solid home team. So the technical edge is with Texas A&M. Here is an angle play that you might want to avoid this week. When you take a look at the Indiana Hoosiers, they have been a great home favorite under Tom Allen. 6-1 against the spread. They blow out weaker foes at home like Eastern Illinois 52-0, and last year did very well. Ball State 38-10, and came away with plenty of wins. 6-1 against the spread as a home favorite. When you look at Connecticut, or even think Connecticut, what do you think? You think one of the worst teams in college football. I mean, last year they were pitiful. Look at all these red numbers for Connecticut. Blown out on a weekly basis. Defense giving up 617 yards per game. Getting beat by 28 points per game, outgained by 241 yards per game. There's 130 teams in the FBS. Last year, Connecticut was 58.4 for an average game grade. Guess what? That ranked number 130, below not only every Power 5 team out there, but Group of 5 team, worst team in college football. But they are getting almost 4 touchdowns this week, and this may be a week to avoid the angle. Now, the angles say Indiana 6-1 as a home favorite. Connecticut is on a 3-11 run overall against the spread. But let's take a little bit closer look at this game. Indiana's quarterback, Michael Penix, who is their starter, missed last week's game. If you click under the individual player stats, you see that Penix sat out the game. So is Ramsey. Penix gives them mobility, and they were a big game. They were fired up for Ohio State, and they've got Michigan State on deck. So this is a little bit of a flat spot for them. Meanwhile, when you look at Connecticut, Connecticut had last week off. You see the bye here? Their last game, they played Illinois, and if you look at that game, they actually led Illinois 13-0, only losing the game by 8 points, and they're pretty respectable. But the one thing I really want to point out in this game, well, two things. First of all, they had to replace their quarterback. They've gone with a true freshman in Zach Zergiata, and last week he had 21-31 for 275 against Illinois. This will be his first road start, but gives him a little bit of hope there. And the second thing is that defense for Connecticut. Connecticut's defense last year, once again, look at these red numbers. Absolutely the worst. They gave up 7.7 yards per carry, 72% completions. Well, you could run on them, but you could also pass on them. They were the worst defense in college football. Now, last year, when I spoke to Coach Etzel, went over the team with him, they had almost the entire defense was made up of freshmen. Well, they've got 10 starters back. They're a year stronger, bigger, faster, and now they've got experience, something they didn't have last year. Now, I'm not going to call them the Chicago Bears, but look at the defense this year. Only gave up 185 yards to Wagner. If you look at the final score, they only beat Wagner by 3, but they outgained him by 207 yards in the opener. And at the half, they led 10-0 with a 202 to 53-yard edge. Last week against Illinois, they were only outgained by 72 yards. That would have been this third best performance of the season last year. Once again, outgained by 241 yards per game. And that's a Big Ten team, Illinois. So their defense this year is actually allowing just 271 yards per game, holding opponents to 148 yards below their season average so far this year. 4.2 yards per carry, respectable, 62% respectable. What I'm saying is the angles are very heavy on Indiana this week, but be careful. It's a good situation. Connecticut off a bye, Indiana in a Big Ten sandwich, and Connecticut appears to have a much improved defense this year. Now, there has been deja vu games or things that happen eerily similar to what happened either the last week or the last year. But 2 weeks ago, there was actually a double deja vu game, and I wanted to show you the highlights on this one just so you could see what I saw. Now, I watch 12 games at a time, and watching the Fresno State USC game, look at the ending of this. Fresno driving for a potential winning touchdown at the end, and their quarterback, Raina, throws a pass, and it sure looks like it's going to be a touchdown, picked off by a safety in the left side of the end zone, with seconds to go in the game, and USC holds on for the win. That same situation happened again last week for Fresno State. Here they are against Minnesota. It's late in the game. Fresno's got a chance in overtime to pull out the win. Here's the pass. It looks like it's going to be a touchdown. Intercepted. There it is. Picked off at the end of the game. And amazingly, the man making the interception was Minnesota defensive back Antoine Winfield. I mentioned that as part of my double deja vu because Antoine Winfield also beat Fresno State the previous year. Now, it wasn't a pass from Jorge Reina at the end of the game, but it was a pass in the end zone at the end of the game, and here it is. Fresno State down 7 against Minnesota with a chance to tie, runs a halfback option pass, throw to the end zone. Antoine Winfield with the interception. Ironically, he would be out for the year after this game, and he missed the rest of the season. He comes back and beats Fresno again this year. So a double deja vu game, 2 passes by Reina that look eerily similar, and 2 interceptions by Winfield in the end zone, which have thwarted Fresno's upset chances at Minnesota the last 2 years. Vanderbilt is just 1-6 as a home underdog the last 7 years. Their average home loss in SEC play the last 2 years, how about by 28.2 points per game their last 7 SEC home games. Now, what part of the reason is the crowd? Let's take a look at the crowd here when Vanderbilt faced Georgia. Look at the sea of red in the crowd. Georgia actually had the crowd advantage. Let's go back to last year when Kentucky played Vanderbilt. Kentucky, look at all the blue in the crowd for this game for Kentucky. Generally, when Vanderbilt's at home, they get decent crowds, but unfortunately, close to 50% of it is the opposing team, and that has piled into their record of 1-6 as a home dog the last 3 seasons. All right, here's an interesting one. UAB is hosting South Alabama. Now, I noticed earlier this year, UAB at home only beat Alabama State 24-19. They were a huge favorite in that game. Since UAB has returned from its departure when it left football and quit football, came into the year 10-1-1 against the spread at home under Bill Clark. And look at these games. Last year, they won their home games by an average of 36-13. They allowed 264 yards per game at home and outgained their opponents by 186 yards per game at home. 2 years ago, they beat their opponents 33-17 on the average. They were plus 55 yards per game at home, minus 51 on the road. And once again, UAB, even with this loss right here, is now standing 10-2-1 against the spread as a home favorite. And they're off a bye. Now, the good thing about Phil Steele Plus is you can take a look. Here they are off a bye. They played Charlotte. They covered that game 28-7. Here they were a double-digit favorite in 2017, off a bye against Louisiana Tech. A double-digit underdog. They pulled the outright upset 23-22. So Bill Clark off 2 regular season byes since they returned is 2-0. They are 10-2-1 against the spread as a home favorite. And the other interesting thing I want to point out is if we go over here to South Alabama, yes, they covered earlier this year against Nebraska, and not a bad record as an away dog for South Alabama. They are 3-5 against the spread. I mean, that's not a great record. It's a losing record, but just 3-5. But the one thing I want to point out, in their 2 years, their road losses, this one's by 14, this one's by 36, this one is by 42, this one is by 21, 45, 35, 24, and 10. This 10-point loss on the road was the very closest they came to covering. It was the very closest they came in any road game. So this is a team that loses its road games by an average of 27 points per game over the last 2 years versus a team that kicks opponents' butts at home. So the angle play here would be to take UAB off a bye at home against South Alabama. That would be your angle on this one. I'm always looking for good underdog coaches, and at South Carolina, it took Will Muschamp, who appeared to be in a rebuilding year in his first year, but actually got to a bowl game. It took him till the end of the season to really get strong as an underdog. In the bowl game, they covered against South Florida. And now, since then, including that bowl game, Will Muschamp has been an underdog 15 times over the last 3 years. And in that span, he is 12-3 against the spread as an underdog. And how about 6 outright upsets? Last week, they trailed Alabama 47-16, and South Carolina got an 11-yard TD pass with 11 seconds left in the game to make it 47-23 and get the cover at plus 25. They needed a 4th and 4 roughing the passer penalty to keep that final drive alive. But nonetheless, Will Muschamp moves to 12-3 as a dog and is practically getting double digits this week at Missouri. Here's something interesting, not necessarily a selection, but I think you might find it interesting. TCU matches up against SMU in the battle for the Iron Skillet this week. Now, TCU's quarterbacks have been struggling. They're hitting just 49.3% on the year. They do have a 2-1 ratio. They have allowed 6 sacks. SMU's quarterback, Shane Buechele, the Texas transfer, hitting 66% with a 5-3 ratio and only been sacked twice. Now, naturally, level of competition. Arkansas State, North Texas, Texas State, none of those 3 teams have a defense like TCU has. TCU's allowed just 17 first downs on the year. Now, what's the interesting thing I wanted to point out? Well, TCU is taking on Shane Buechele, and while Buechele's in his first year at SMU, he was at Texas. And let's take a look at Texas. Now, last year, and once again, all you have to do when you're navigating the site, go to the individual player stats, go back to last year for Texas, and we see that Shane Buechele did not play TCU. It was Sam Ehlinger on the field against TCU. So what's the big deal here? Well, you can go back to 2017 and look at the individual player stats. Shane Buechele did indeed start and finish the game against TCU. 21 of 44, that's under 50% of his passes. And in that game, Texas had 7 points with Shane Buechele at quarterback against Gary Patterson's defense. And guess what? Go back to 16. Once again, this stuff is all available on every team on the Phil Steele Plus site. But here's 2016 individual player stats. And guess what? Shane Buechele was the starting quarterback that year as well. Now, they played TCU on a Friday. Once again, under 50% completion, 16-39 against Gary Patterson's defense. And Texas managed just 9 points in that game. So in the two games combined, Shane Buechele led Texas to 16 points or 8 points per game against TCU's defense, which is pretty good. Now, I've been riding SMU, so I don't know if I'd want to go against SMU in a rivalry game as an underdog, especially the way SMU has been playing. But I just thought I thought you would find that interesting that Shane Buechele's actually started 2 games against TCU and struggled both times. I'm going to call this game, and I can make a case for either team. Let's take a look at the Stanford-Oregon game this week. And if you base it purely on angles, you're taking Stanford. You know, Stanford has been a home dog exactly 5 times in the last 11 years. Do you know what their record is as a home dog? How about 5-0, 100%? They are taking on an Oregon team that is one of the weakest road teams in the country. Oregon has really struggled away from Autzen Stadium. Already this year, they're 0-1 away from Autzen Stadium in a game played at a neutral site. That means over the last 5 years, they have won exactly 4 road games and lost 13 away from home. 4-13 straight up, and how about 4-12-1 against the spread? That's a super strong case for the home team here, Stanford, which opened up the season knocking off Northwestern, and David Shaw is 45-8 straight up at home. How about that? But let's take a look at the other side of the angle, and I'm going to show you some video on this one from last year's game. The Oregon Ducks were playing Stanford at home. They were leading 24-7. Now watch here at the end of the game when they clinch it. Jalen Redd takes off for the end zone and scores a touchdown. That makes the score 31-7 and absolutely clinches it for Oregon. But they review it, and his foot hit the pylon, so they spot the ball at the 1-yard line. No problem. They score a touchdown the next play, make it 31-7. Well, here this play happened. Oregon fumbled. Stanford scoops it up, returns it 80 yards for a touchdown, and all of a sudden they're back in at 24-14. But it wasn't over yet. Oregon's running out the clock. They have a 2nd and 2. They get the first down, ball game over, they have clinched the victory. What happens? Here, a fumble at the Stanford 40-yard line with 51 seconds to play. Stanford kicks this 32-yard field goal to tie it with no time left and pulls out an absolute miracle win in overtime. That means if Oregon gets up on Stanford in this game, they will not let up, much like UCF last week. UCF had something to prove. They wanted to show that they were a legitimate team. They were taking on a Power 5 foe. They led 38-7 at the half with 413 yards offense in the first half against that Stanford D. And Oregon, of course, their offense has put up over 1,100 yards the last 2 weeks. So if you're looking at based on motivation, the way the teams are playing right now, you take Oregon. If you base it on the technical angles, you clearly play Stanford, a great home team against a poor road team. And here's the final factor to throw into your equation. At the start of the year, Stanford was a 2-point favorite during the preseason. Now Stanford is a 10-point dog. That's a 12-point shift from where the number was. Add it all up, you decide. I can make a case for or against either team in this one. This matchup, the Mirage Bowl, Kansas and West Virginia. If you looked at Kansas and West Virginia in the first 2 games of the year, both teams were weak and looked to be getting ready for getting blown out last week. Look at West Virginia. Barely got past James Madison by 7. We're actually outgained and out first down 18-13 in the opening game, rushing for just 34 yards. The next week against Missouri, 171 yards offense, 30 yards rush. After 2 games, they're averaging 1.1 yards per carry. Last week, they were taking on an excellent NC State defense. Meanwhile, their defense was giving up the yards. In fact, had given up 232 yards rushing to Missouri the previous week. What happened? Boom, a completely different West Virginia team last week. Don't know where it came from. but their 445 yards almost match what they had in the first two games combined, and against a better defense than they faced in the first two games combined. They ran for 173 yards, 6.2 yards per carry. Now, what was the mirage? The first 2 weeks or this past week for West Virginia? They have a first-year head coach, don't really know what to expect here. Now, with Kansas, they open up with two lackluster games. Indiana State, they got past them 24-17. But like West Virginia, are outgained by this FCS squad, 365 to 344 in the opener, played to an average game grade of 66.1. The second week, they were beat at home by Coastal Carolina. Not just beat, but out first down, 20-17, and lost that game 12-7. No offense for Kansas whatsoever. Now they're facing a Boston College team last week that came in on a roll. BC, if you look at them, had beaten Virginia Tech, crushed Richmond, was playing at a much better game grade. What happened? Well, you guessed it. As I mentioned, this is the Mirage Bowl. Kansas last week absolutely dominated Boston College. Now, they did trail. If you go back and take a look here, and when you click here on Phil Steele Plus on the box, you can click there and you can see how the game went. They were trailing 24-21 and took over late first half. 45 seconds ago, BC got the touchdown to go up 24-21. Kansas got like an 83-yard run to set up this 3-yard TD pass with 5 seconds left. That gave them the momentum. In the second half, they dominated, had a 48-24 edge, and that woeful offense of Kansas came to life. Now, Puka Williams, their running back here, missed the opener. And once again, if you click up here under individual stats, you can get the game-by-game stats. You see that Puka missed the opening game with suspension, had 99 yards in his first game back, 121 yards that week. Herbert rushed for 187 against a pretty good Boston College defense. And their quarterback, Carter Stanley, had by far his best game of the year so far with 3 touchdown passes. With West Virginia, once again, they averaged 1.1 yards per carry coming in. They were taking on an excellent rush defense. Kendi McCoy ends up rushing for 66 yards in this game. It was mostly done through the air, though, with Austin Kendall, who had struggled. He only had a 3-2 ratio coming in. He had a 3-1 ratio in the game. So now West Virginia travels to face Kansas. One thing you can also do, you can see the series history. You just come down here to the schedule and you would click on Kansas against West Virginia. You can see that the home team has actually gone 0-5 against the spread. The win means if the home team won straight up. The red means if they covered. They've not covered 5 in a row. And Kansas has lost 5 in a row to West Virginia by pretty good margins in each and every one. Have they been outgained in each game? Yes, they have. Look at that, minus 381, minus 421, minus 164, minus 71, minus 272. So West Virginia's dominated this series. Kansas, the last time at home, did give them a game last year for a while, but then West Virginia pulled away. So this one really intrigues me. I don't really have a selection on it, but I just thought it was fascinating that both teams got off to incredibly poor starts. Both teams are off games that no one expected last week. They were both large underdogs that dominated their games. So this is the Mirage Bowl. Let's find out which team is for real and which team is what you thought they were those first 2 weeks of the season.
Hey everyone, this is Phil Steele. If you're a hardcore football fan, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and of course, hit the bell. And comment below your favorite football moment of the week and let us know what you'd like to see here on my YouTube channel.